Hey, all you weirdos, nerds, dorks, dolls, punks, ligabatukwas, and whatever federal agent that's been assigned to keep tabs on me. Welcome to Trash Doll Analysis, where your favorite trash doll gives her trashy analysis of film. This is episode 3 of Hey, I've Seen This Before, where we examine two very different films from different genres or different styles or eras and try to build an argument for why they are secretly the same movie and justify how it made me say, hey, I've seen this before. Today I'm going to be talking about a film that's a horror classic, but not one that kicked off a franchise or became a Halloween staple. It's a bit more cerebral than fun. It became well known enough that there was a remake years later, but the remake is largely forgotten and it failed to have the impact of the original. I was surprised to find in my research that despite making this film, the director hadn't done any other horror movies, despite this one being so impactful on the genre. For those who have played Silent Hill, some of this description may sound familiar. A main character will navigate a world where reality seems to be in flux. They'll slip in and out of a mirror world where time distorts and everything gets dark and surreal. And they'll encounter twisted, almost demonic versions of humans who watch them or follow them with a hostile intent. Some of these monster characters are shown to the audience with a sped-up frame rate to make their movements seem bizarre and otherworldly. And we as the audience are never sure what scenes are real or imagined, as they use that trope of the main character suddenly waking up from sleep, and neither we nor the character are sure if it meant the prior scene was all just a dream. The big reveal at the end of the film is that the totality of the film was imagined. While rather common to encounter these types of film in the post-Sixth Sense world, this is an early example of a main character was dead the whole time movie, and the whole film was a surreal, imagined, possible future, or perhaps a literal purgatory lived out in the dreams of the protagonist in the moments between their awareness of their impending death and their eventual acceptance of this death. In that imagined world, our protagonist encounters a variety of characters, some seeming to encourage a moving on, while others act to tempt the character to remain in this liminal space. This world seems to be collapsing around the protagonist. We see that as a doctor that they've seen for their deteriorating mental health just seems to disappear. The film ends with the reveal of the character being dead the entire time, and we linger over their body and the credits roll. So, what movie do you think I'm describing? I mean, it's pretty obvious. I'm talking, of course, about the 1962 film Carnival of Souls. So this is where folk familiar with both films are saying, you know what? Yeah, I'll actually give you this one. And to that I say, well, I'm still going to record an excessively long video essay anyway. This is my channel, and I like those movies, and I want to talk about them. So there. So, for those not familiar with one or both, let's get into them. First, though, it's confession time. For this series, I try to pick two films that are pretty different, so that way it's a unique take. I'd seen both of these films, and as described in the intro, there is a decent level of overlap in... I'd seen both of these films, and as described in the intro, there is a decent level of overlap in the stories, and there's also a little bit of overlap in some of the themes and messages, but I really thought they were different enough that they were unrelated. But after already committing to the topic, I started the background research, and I was aware that one of the oldest, if not the oldest, examples of this trope of main character being dead the whole time came from a short story, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge from 1890. And I was first introduced to this story when I was a edgy teen through a cheesy death metal band called The Deceased and their song, The Hanging Soldier. Basically a story of a Confederate soldier being executed by hanging, and in that moment between the platform drop and the neck snapping, he imagines an escape and return home, only to be brought back to the reality of his own death. So I started the research on how similar Owl Creek was to Carnival of Souls and how similar it was to Jacob's Ladder. And I got the unfortunate information that there is a 1961 film adaptation of the story from France. And the author of Carnival of Souls flat out said he considered Carnival of Souls to be a modern era remake of that French film. And then I found out that the director of Jacob's Ladder was heavily influenced by that French adaptation of Owl Creek. So alas, the acknowledgement must be made that when two different writer-director teams are creating pieces that are inspired by the same source material, it isn't much of an inspired hot take to point out their similarities. And now I know how Elsa felt when she learned that everyone already knew that Walk the Dinosaur was about nuclear annihilation.
What? It's not like a secret or anything. I spent so much time deconstructing every line.
So now I'm faced with the option to retreat back into another script or make like Neil Breen and double down on my current project.
And that is what I intend to do.
As a walking amalgamation of bad decisions, of course the answer is clear. I'll be continuing with this super obvious argument that two films I know to have come from the same source material are not so secretly extremely similar. So of course they've made me say, hey, I've seen this before. So let's get into the films. Since Jacob's Ladder is the more well-known of the two, let's turn the spotlight onto Carnival of Souls. Carnival of Souls was written by John Clifford and directed by Herc Harvey and was released in 1962. I have really mixed feelings about it. I first saw it when I was gifted one of those multi-packs of public domain horror movies. Checking today, some sources are saying the copyright was supposed to go back to Clifford, so I guess I'll find out for sure when I post this video and see if there's a copyright claim against it. There really is excellent cinematography on display. There are some good choices made for in-camera effects, and there are some scenes where Candice Hilligoss puts in convincing emotional performance. But I have to acknowledge there is a reason this is a film that ended up on Riff Tracks.
Say what you want about her, she can meander the hell out of a scene.
Oh, yeah. Well, Mike, she was top of her meandering class at Spokane Community College. Really?
I would mostly put it on the editing. I know a film that's already short at 80 minutes, you kind of need to pad it out. But you shouldn't cover up your lack of content by making shots and scenes that last much longer than they need to. I think it's a perfect piece for a fan re-edit to tighten it up. Scenes that could feel surreal and dreamlike just end up crossing the line to meandering and aimless instead. And I want to make it clear, I really do love this film. I don't think I'm ever going to make videos about movies that I don't actually really like. And again, there's a lot in it to praise, and I'm just being harsh on it because I feel like it fell short of its potential. It gave us an alternative to the horror dominating the era, which was mostly William Castle and Roger Corman fighting over whose turn it was to put Vincent Price in an old spooky mansion. Carnival of Souls, on the other hand, was unique and could have stood out as one of the best of the era with just a handful of changes. Another pass with editing, some more money pumped into the effects, and to build up that last set piece. It could have bumped from its like B plus, A minus level all the way up to S tier for me. But, you know, I suppose the same could be said of any movie. If it was just made a little better, it would have ended up better. I mean, what a take. They're gonna have to update and reprint all the film theory textbooks with this revelation that I've just made. Doing a better job making movies results in better movies. Anyway, even with its flaws, Carnival of Souls was impactful. Alice Cooper cited his original makeup design as being inspired from the ghouls in Carnival of Souls. Well, that combined with the Betty Davis character and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Multiple articles speculate, though admittedly never confirm, the film's influence on David Lynch. Wes Craven liked it enough to attach his name to a remake that he was initially going to direct before changing to an executive producer role, and while not near the top, it keeps showing up on top horror movie lists, and all this is on a minuscule budget and directed by a man who not only had no other horror movies, little one, be gone, be gone, be gone. And all this was on a minuscule budget and directed by a man who not only had no other horror films in his filmography, but no other films at all. The director's only prior experience was with educational shorts and safety videos.
Shake hands with danger. Need a guy who ought to know. I used to laugh at safety. Now they call me Three-Finger Joe.
So, despite his history including Shake Hands with Danger and Why Study Home Economics, Harvey created an incredibly influential and unique film. Here is the question, though. Did Carnival of Souls influence Jacob's Ladder? I couldn't find any source indicating so, other than film critics' speculation. I see a couple of shots here and there that might be indicative of a direct influence.
You hear me. You can hear me.
But I'd accept that it's coincidence, and other similarities could easily be explained by having both of them having been influenced by the same source material. But here is something I do feel confident saying. It's pretty clear that Carnival of Souls was influenced by Jacob's Ladder. And I'm referring to the remake from 1998 that I'd mentioned earlier. And I'll be getting into that more deeply later, because I keep thinking about this group of media and how it feels less like a linear timeline of one piece affecting another, but instead like this fractal of reoccurring patterns spiraling and circling back in on itself. Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, to the story of the French short, to Carnival of Souls, to Twilight Zone, to Jacob's Ladder, to the Silent Hill video game, to half the direct-to-video Hellraiser sequels, back to the Carnival of Souls remake, to the Silent Hill films, to the Jacob's Ladder remake. An Ouroboros twisting back in on itself, consuming itself before mutating into something new yet again. But anyway, focus back onto the two films. Jacob's Ladder, an influential horror classic directed by Adrian Lind, who, like Harvey, had no prior or subsequent experience with horror. His other work includes Fatal Attraction, Indecent Proposal, Flashdance, straightforward dramas and romance films. Nothing that has the same surreal dream logic of Ladder. Nothing that has Ladder's horrific demonic imagery or anxious paranoia or uncovering a government conspiracy. But what it does have in common with his other work is the human connection. There aren't any one-dimensional love interests. There are no hollow characters whose only purpose is to move to the next phase of the film. These characters are real. And when a character feels real, it makes us care about them and about the film. That is something I have seen repeatedly in high-quality horror films. Directors that started out in other genres, bringing their experience and expertise into horror. A neo-noir action director making The Exorcist, an experienced comedic writer and actor directing Weapons, and here, a drama director bringing realistic, grounded characters into a horror film. It's those realistic characters that keep us tethered in an otherwise surreal story, where we could easily be swept away into the confusion of abstract imagery, red herring tangents, and impossible timeline. This human story of trauma and guilt and connection with others is what elevates it beyond a horror film of beautifully grotesque images. That is why it has endured. It's why it influenced the Silent Hill video games and films. It's why, despite the original performing poorly at the box office and receiving some very mixed reviews, it justified a remake in 2019. So let's get into the comparison of the story beats of each of the films to justify why it made me say, hey, I've seen this before. But first, the very obvious differences between the films, to justify not initially realizing that they were so similar because they drew from the same source material. The main characters are extremely different. Mary Henry is a much more passive character. It works for the piece, but it seems more like the story is happening to her and around her, more than Mary actively engaging with it. Jacob, on the other hand, is seeking out allies to investigate a conspiracy and acting as the catalyst driving the story, even though there are periods he loses his agency to delusional fever dreams. Carnival of Souls revolves around the titular abandoned carnival.
Titular, huh?
Mary is drawn there repeatedly through the film, but again, not in an active manner, almost as an inevitability she can't resist. Jacob doesn't really have an equivalent location. There are a few places of importance in Ladder, such as the chiropractor office, the hospital, and the climax sequence at his ex's home. And while a parallel can be made with Carnival to how he seems drawn to his former home, it doesn't feel the same. There's a warmth and familiarity there, as opposed to the looming menace of the abandoned fairgrounds. The supporting cast is also very different. Everyone in Carnival of Souls is kept at arm's length. A pastor who always stays an employer as opposed to a confidant. A housemate pushing for a physical and romantic relationship that Mary has no interest in. A landlady who, despite her welcoming demeanor, is also kept at arm's length by Mary. Jacob's life, in contrast, is rich with friends and lovers and comrades, and even warm, welcoming familiarity with the strangers on the street. Next, the stories. Despite the overlapping beats that made me say, hey, I've seen this before, the stories are extremely different. Mary is running away from her hometown after the tragic death of friends. She shows up in this new home, taking a job from a stranger, living with a stranger, and isolating herself. And over the course of a few days, she feels drawn to an abandoned fairground at the edge of town. She feels increasingly destabilized by fears she's being stalked by a dark presence. She then drives out to the carnival space for a final confrontation with the inevitable end. In contrast, David's Ladder has a lot more going on. It's a very dense piece, twisting a story of grief and guilt and shame of a dead child, a separation from a love, an attempt to rebuild, a government conspiracy revolving around testing hallucinogenic chemical weapons on Vietnam veterans.
Most powerful thing I ever saw. Even a bad trip, and believe me, I've had my share, did not compare to the fury of the ladder.
The ladder?
Yeah, that's what they called it. A fast trip straight down the ladder, right to the primal fear, right to the base anger. I'm telling you, man, it was powerful. Well, I don't need to tell you, you already know. We did experiments on jungle monkeys. It worked. They bashed each other's heads in, gouged out their eyes, chewed off their tails. The brass loved it. Then they made us try it on Charlie.
And that's not even touching the story below the surface. The religious allegory that very strongly hinted at through the film and made more explicit at the end. That's all but missing from Carnival of Souls. There's also a need for the audience to accept an impossible timeline in Jacob's Ladder. Carnival of Souls, on the other hand, while having some scenes ambiguous on whether or not they were real or imagined, the timeline is still at least mostly linear. Finally, the meaning. What does each of the films mean? What is the message it is giving the audience? Again, Jacob's Ladder is like an ogre. It has a lot of layers. Even now, writing the script or recording it, I'm still processing what this film was even saying. Carnival of Souls is much more straightforward. I think I'm satisfied with my current processing of Carnival, which isn't to say there isn't more to it or it's not saying something deeper than a surface level, fun, spooky movie, but I don't stay up at night analyzing and reanalyzing what Carnival is saying to me, the way I am for Jacob's Ladder. So, Carnival of Souls is the story of a woman who dies in the opening scene, lives out an imagined life in the moments of her death before it's revealed to the audience that it was all a dying fever dream. It starts off with our protagonist Mary and her two friends being goaded into a race by two other youths. I think it's important to take note that Mary is a passenger in the car, not the driver. Again, this is a story happening to Mary and not because of Mary. While driving over an old wooden bridge, there is an accident. The car swerves off the bridge and down to the river below. Her two friends drown, trapped in the car. But somehow, Mary makes her way to shore, and rescuers run to her aid, and she remains distant and cold, claiming no memory of how she got out of the car.
Mary Henry.
Are you all right?
How'd you get out?
Yeah, put this on. We better get you back to town.
What about the other girls?
I don't remember.
She leaves town and takes a job as an organist for a church, but the film makes it clear that she isn't there out of religious faith. This scene, where she accepts the job, has her explicitly reject the idea of seeking community in religion.
Well, Mary, you'll make a fine organist for that church. Be very satisfying to you, I think.
It's just a job to me.
Well, it's not quite the attitude for going into church work.
I'm not taking the vows. I'm only going to play the organ.
As Mary drives to her new home, we get the first glimpse of the abandoned fair space. First time the audience sees it, it's dark and far away. The suggestion of a structure in the distance. And that's when it begins. Her visions of a dark, ghoulish man following her in impossible ways, appearing in a reflection, and then in front of her car. Mary arrives at her new home, settling into the boarding house, and the next day she arrives at her new job, where, for a second time, she is offered community through faith and rejects it.
We'll have to have some sort of reception. They want to meet you.
Couldn't we just skip that?
Skip that? Well, I don't suppose it's an absolute necessity. I don't know what some of the ladies will say.
If they say I'm a fine organist, that should be enough, shouldn't it?
Well, yes, of course. We'll let it go at that for the time being. But, my dear, you cannot live in isolation from the human race, you know.
We, the audience, see the ghoul return, stalking Mary, but she does not see or respond to it other than it connecting to the call of the carnival as Mary requests a trip back to the pavilion and the fairgrounds, this time even closer, but not quite reaching that destination.
This used to be quite a place. It's been deserted for a long time now.
Will you take me in?
My goodness, no. It isn't safe out there anymore.
Mary returns home and we're introduced to John. John is Mary's neighbor in the boarding house and a bit of an alcoholic and a sleaze. He repeatedly makes advances on Mary and, despite her rejections, is insistent in a creeper incel sort of way. John representing a temptation of sex and alcohol that Mary initially rejects. And now Mary encounters the ghoul again, no longer outside or stalking from afar. He is inside the house, looking directly up at Mary. But when her door opens, it's only the landlady, Miss Thomas, who assures her that there was nobody there.
There's nobody there.
The next day, Mary has her first experience of slipping out of reality. While in a department store, she loses her ability to hear the world around her, and no one can see her or hear her.
What's the matter with her? What's the matter with everyone? Why don't they answer me?
And in this otherworldly slip, she encounters the ghoul again, now close enough to touch. Before snapping back into reality and encountering the final relevant character, Dr. Samuels.
I'm Dr. Samuels. My office is right across the street there. You've had a shock. If you would like my assistance, I'll be glad to offer it.
Dr. Samuel brings her back to his office to hear her experience, but like most doctors in that era, dismisses her concerns as a typical hysterical woman.
The point is this. Our imaginations play tricks on us. They often misinterpret what we see and hear. Do you agree?
I suppose so.
If that can happen in ordinary times, go a step further. Look what can happen in a high fever or following a serious emotional shock.
Doesn't seem possible that I could have imagined all of it.
Does this man, this figure, resemble anyone you've ever known? An acquaintance or your father?
No.
And let's be clear about this character. This random doctor that dismisses Mary's concerns as being hysteria or latent daddy issues is not even a psychiatrist.
I'm not a psychiatrist, and perhaps I'm being clumsy at all this. But But I am suggesting that perhaps this figure represents a guilt feeling.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Maybe. Frankly, I don't know.
To the film's credit, though, Mary rejects the dismissive and misogynistic attitude of Dr. Samuels and investigates the only connection she knows to the encroaching ghoul, the abandoned carnival. And despite finding nothing, the audience at least gets treated to some well-composed haunting shots. Visions of the bathhouse haunt Mary the next day at work and corrupt her organ playing until the minister, aghast with her profane choices in organ music, stops her and fires her.
Profane.
Before leaving, the minister offers for a third and final time to aid Mary in finding salvation before she turns back and walks away from faith and back to the temptation of Mr. Linden.
That does not mean that I am abandoning you, nor should you turn your back on the church. There is help here, and I urge you to accept it.
Each encounter with the ghoul coming physically closer, a third rejection of faith, and a turn to John's debaucherous world of drinking and dancing.
Now me, I not only drink really, I really drink.
Mary remaining aloof and detached until hoping John might offer protection from the encroaching darkness. But John Linden shows himself to be just as useless as John Lydon.
What's the matter with you?
That man's after me. You gotta stop him. He's after me again.
I'm getting
Now you have to go.
Not me, sister. That's just what I need. Get mixed up with some girl who's off her rocker.
I don't want to be left alone.
And Mary resolves to leave.
I can't let her stay in this house.
You won't have to worry about that. She's determined to leave the city, and she wants to get away as soon as possible.
I hope she does leave.
Well, you're in luck. She's determined to leave the city, and she wants to get away as soon as possible.
On her way out of town, she stops for car maintenance, and as she slips again out of sync with time and reality, we enter into the sequence most reminiscent of Jacob's Ladder. Again, no one will interact with her until she reaches the park where she last slipped back in sync with reality. And she reaches back out to Dr. Solomon, only to find that, unlike the past experiences, re-entering the normal world is no longer an option for escaping the ghoul.
Doctor, you've got to tell me what to do.
Mary returns a final time to the abandoned pavilion, has her final confrontation with the darkness that's been following her, and then the audience gets the reveal that the events of the film had all been imagined as her body is pulled up out of her friend's submerged car. So, what does it mean? What is the film saying? What is the audience supposed to take away from it? Well, let's go over the story beats of Jacob's Ladder first, and then we'll look at whether there is more than surface level plot similarity. Again, Ladder is a much more dense film than Carnival. I've rewatched it a few times in preparation for this essay. I feel like I'm sliding into the mentality of one of those interview subjects from room 237, looking for meaning in the color grading or in each establishing shot, the metaphor of each costume choice, allegory in each set. So I'm actively trying to wrench my brain back to a more accessible surface level reading, and also an active decision to accept that the events of the film must be imagined. The narrative is an impossible timeline of events, and it simply cannot play out in a linear fashion. It reminds me a bit of a Don Coscarelli film, where there's a series of events that are impossible to fit into a linear order, and it should instead be enjoyed as a surreal series of individual scenes, thematically connected, but not necessarily narratively connected. Jacob's Ladder opens with Jacob and his comrades in Vietnam, as one by one they enter a medical episode of seizures and hallucinations, while simultaneously coming under attack.
Fuck, something's wrong. What the fuck's wrong with you? Fuck. It's my head! My head! Somebody help me! Get up! Get up! Paul, help me! My head! My head! Help me! What the fuck is wrong with you? Come on, get up!
As Jacob is stabbed with a bayonet, we shift to the present of the film, jolting awake in the subway. I'm actually a little embarrassed to say that when I was a youngin' and first saw this film, I didn't pick up the entire film was an imagined or literal purgatory until the dead the whole time reveal at the very end. Watching it now, though, frankly, it's not even a twist ending. I don't think this video needs a spoiler warning since it's more than hinted at throughout the film. It's bluntly beaten into the viewer.
Let me look at your hand.
No thanks.
Come on. It's fine. You left-handed, right-handed?
Right.
Give it to me. You have a very strange line. No, it's not funny. See, according to this, you're already dead.
Where do you want to go?
Home. This is your home. You're dead.
Dead? No.
So, the story beats. As surreal and dreamlike Carnival of Souls is, it at least is mostly linear. Jacob's Ladder is much more disjointed, but like other competent disjointed films like 12 Monkeys, it never loses the audience. The film follows a present that is sprinkled with imagined alternate timelines, trauma flashbacks, and possibly literal or possibly hallucinated demons stalking Jacob. The main story follows Jacob Singer trying to put his life back together after the trauma of war, his son's death, and the collapse of his marriage. He's now living with his girlfriend Jezebel and trying to keep himself attached to others through his job, through parties, through his work.
How's it going?
Better now.
I'm gonna go home.
What's wrong?
It's just one of those days. My back is killing me. I'm going to see Louie.
Oh, no, not again. Your boss is going to kill you.
What can you do?
Well, I miss riding home with you. Yeah? I was looking forward to it.
Yeah.
And trying to not let on how bad his hallucinations have been getting. This leads him down a path of government conspiracy. He's approached by another vet who tells him that his hallucinations are more than the typical NAM PTSD.
I don't know who they are or what they are, but they're gonna get me, and I'm scared, Jake. I'm so scared I can't do anything. I can't go to my sister's. I can't even go home. I don't know what to do.
Home.
What do you mean? I've seen him too.
His platoon was the subject of experimental drugs meant to increase aggression and lethality. Jacob then contacts his old comrades and retains a lawyer to try to prove he isn't crazy and that what he is experiencing has a tangible explanation and the government needs to be held responsible.
I'll look into it.
Do you think we have a chance? I need sworn depositions from all of you. I need a list of every other member of the platoon or the survivor. This is great. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one thing. If we do find that the military is implicated in this, you all stand to make quite a bit of money.
And this is where I'm tempted to go into a long tangent about the unethical U.S. government having a history of experimentation on soldiers. But I'll resist this urge and instead say that if you want to learn about some real-world examples that this film drew from, go watch some Chill Goblin videos. Jacob is then followed not only by these visions of monsters and demons, but also the Alphabet Boys, scaring off his attorney, assassinating his corroborating witness, altering his military records.
I'll tell you what's wrong with me. I don't know you from Adam, right? You walk into my office with some bizarro story and demand that I check it out? All right, fine, I did. Now, I don't know what kind of a fool you take me for, but you have used and abused me, sir. I don't like it. Used you? That's right. I checked with the Army's Bureau of Information. You never even went to Vietnam. What's that supposed to mean? It means that you and your friends are wacko. You were all discharged on psychological grounds after some war games in Thailand. War games in Thailand? Don't you see what they're doing? That's a lie. We were in Da Nang, for God's sake. You gotta believe me. Go fuck yourself.
We as the audience don't know if it's the government conspiracy or if it's Jacob's delusions catching up to him. There is a scene where he runs into the VA to see his longtime doctor, just to be told the doctor has been gone for years, and there's no record of Jacob being a patient.
I need to see Dr. Carlson, please.
Carlson? Is he new here?
No, he's been here for years.
Not according to my charts. Do you have an appointment?
No. Listen, I need to see him. I know where his room is. Just give me a pass. Don't be long, 10 minutes.
What was your name?
Singer, Jacob Singer.
I didn't even have my lunch yet. I'm sorry, but there's no record of a Jacob Singer in our files.
The film gives us these red herrings of the experimental hallucinogens and government conspiracy or just trauma-induced psychosis to give the audience a plausible deniability for what we are shown Jacob is experiencing. Again, I'm probably one of the few viewers that accepted this possibility and didn't accept the very blunt message that Jacob is in reality dead. As things escalate and Jacob's connection to reality becomes less and less manageable, we get the resolution. Jacob returns to his old home, encounters his dead son, comes to peace with his time to move on.
Come on, let's go on.
And the blunt reveal that the events of the film had occurred between Jacob being stabbed and then finally dying back in Vietnam. So here's the question. Was Jacob literally experiencing some sort of purgatory with tastes of heaven and hell? Was this a deathbed fever dream of all sorts of natural chemicals being released into a dying brain? Or was this a hallucination brought on by the experimental drugs given by the military without Jacob's knowledge?
Hello, this is Jacob Singer.
Jacob, I was in country in '68. I was part of a chemical warfare unit out of Saigon. We conducted secret experiments for the government.
My God.
Now, if you really pay attention to all the hints through the film, the answer to the question is crystal clear, and that is, it doesn't matter. It's not the point. If that's where your analysis is focused, Dan Olson is going to roll his eyes and get just as annoyed with you as he did with people trying to decide if the end of Annihilation had an alien replicant. So if decoding the scenes into a literal narrative isn't the point, then what is? Well, as someone whose brain often works super literally, I appreciate that the film pretty much comes to full stop, has a character look directly at the audience and tell us the point.
So the way he sees it, if you're frightened of dying and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels, freeing you from the earth. It's just a matter of how you look at it, that's all. So don't worry, okay?
And just in case we didn't internalize it the first time, it's repeated again at the end.
If you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels, freeing you from the earth.
So it's about coming to peace with our own mortality and the inevitability of death. And the film repeatedly tells us this should be done through the lens of Christian mythology, as there's references to demons, angels, and hell. But here's where I pause. It doesn't really line up with the Christian lore. This isn't about having lived a godly life or engaging in the ritualistic Catholic sacraments of confession and penance, or the Protestant born-again acceptance of Jesus Christ into your heart. It's more about finding peace in the inevitability of the cycles of life and death. So what is it trying to tell us? Well, the film specifically tells us we need to focus on names.
Mr. Singer, what an appropriate name for a man who can't keep his mouth shut.
The film also shines a light on the fact that most of the main characters have biblical names.
Who, Jed?
No, the little one.
Eli. Why can't you remember their names?
They're weird names.
They're biblical names. They were prophets.
Well, personally, I never went for church names. What?
Where do you think Jezebel came from?
So let's take a quick look at each one and see what it means. So there's Sarah in the film. She's Jacob's ex, and in the Bible, she's the wife of Abraham, who is obviously the cornerstone of the Abrahamic faiths. Her biblical stories are those of unwavering faith through tribulations. And I don't know, I think there's something to look into there. Jacob's two surviving sons are Jed and Eli, Jediah being an alternate name for King Solomon, and Eli being a mentor to Samuel, and also known for failing to instill religious conviction in his own family. And neither of those stories seem to connect to their brief appearances and actions in the film. The son more relevant to the story is Gabe, played by Macaulay Culkin. Okay, so here we have something that's starting to fit a little bit more into the film. Gabriel being a messenger delivering important communications from God. Next we have Jacob's girlfriend, Jezebel. And here we start to get interesting. She was the wife of an Israeli king, Ahab, and was known as a worshiper of old pre-Abrahamic gods, now cast into the role of demons. She's so far the only one with a biblical connection to one of the previously named characters. as she was in conflict with Elijah.
Kid dropped it off.
Who, Jed?
No, the little one.
Eli.
Her name is meant to evoke a seductress and a manipulator, pulling people away from the worship of the Abrahamic God. So this character definitely needs further examination of her connection to the biblical mythology. Finally, Jacob and Jacob's ladder. The gist of the biblical story is he and his mother trick his dad into making him his dying father's heir over his older brother, and then when traveling to another city to avoid his brother, he has a dream of a staircase connecting the heavens and earth. And God tells him, hey, that place where you're sleeping would be a good place for a new city, and you could fill it with people to worship me. In the film, there's no significance to his biblical counterpart's conflict with his brother. I'll touch a little bit on the 2019 remake where there is a brother character, but let's not worry about that now. I think the only relevance of the name is the vision of the stairway to heaven. This story, when viewed through a Christian lens, is a foretelling of the coming of Christ as the connection bridge between man and the divine and the path for mortals to reach the heavens. Despite all these characters coming from Old Testament stories, I believe that the connections to the film's characters and their biblical counterparts are meant to be seen through a Christian lens over a Jewish one, as again, the film makes specific reference to the Christian-specific concept of hell.
I'm going to hell.
There's also a later story with Jacob having a literal physical wrestling match with the divine, which could play into the film's Jacob's struggle with faith and mortality, but considering the original title was meant to evoke Dante's Inferno rather than the story of Jacob, I think the film is directing us to the story of traversing the mortal realm to the divine. So this is where I get a little stuck. The film is directing us to Christian mythology and specific biblical characters, but the messages given by the film just don't seem to mesh up with that. Specifically Jezebel. So this is one of the Bible's greatest villains, seducing and manipulating folks into worshipping the allegedly false gods. But what we see in the film is an incredibly patient and understanding partner. Jacob shows up home in the middle of the night without calling to let her know he was working late, and she immediately accepts his explanation.
How come you're so late?
Bednash didn't show up again. Called in sick. He's always sick. So I worked.
He embarrasses her by having a breakdown and making a scene at a party, and she immediately lets that go to provide attentive care for him when she realizes he has a dangerously high fever.
If you go crazy, Jake, you're going crazy about yourself. You understand?
What to say?
Oh my God, I'm calling the doctor.
She lies for him without hesitation, even after he disappears for days at a time without a call.
I'm not here. You haven't seen me.
Hello?
Jacob Singer there, please.
No, I haven't seen him all night.
Then the film gives us a shot of her twisting into a demonic form.
Anybody home?
Who are you?
So what is this telling us? My initial thought was the film is setting her up in contrast with Sarah, Jezebel, the bad guy, only using her kindness as a way to manipulate Jacob into remaining in this purgatory by not processing his own death. And we'll set that compared to the biblical good guy, Sarah. But we see Sarah doing the exact same things, trying to help Jacob feel at peace with his place in this fake reality and giving him false assurance that he isn't dead.
I'm not dead.
Oh no. Of course you're not.
You just hurt your back, that's all. It'll be fine. It'll just take some time.
This is similar to trying to parse out the Lewis character, Jacob's chiropractor that delivered the point of the movie monologue I'd referenced earlier. The film tells us he is in conflict with the doctors in the hospital Jacob is brought to after escaping the Alphabet Boys.
What have they done?
Can I help you, sir? Go in there.
What is this? The Middle Ages?
Don't touch him.
And they call this modern medicine? This is barbaric. Barbaric!
All right, just calm down.
Why don't you just burn him at the stake and put him out of his misery? Sir, you're gonna have to leave. Stay back! Don't come near me. You understand? What is this, my jail? Stay back! Take one step and I'll wrap this around your neck.
He literally, physically attacks and shouts at them, saving Jacob from their captivity. But these doctors are giving Jacob the blunt truth.
There is no out of here. You've been killed. Don't you remember?
And this is the same truth that Lewis is trying to tell Jacob, but just in a more gentle way. The film tells us through Jacob that we should be viewing Lewis as an angel.
You know you look like an angel, Louis. Like an overgrown cherub.
But Lewis flat out tells us that those characters he had been in conflict with should also be seen by the audience as angels.
If you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels, freeing you from the earth.
So the film is giving me confusing messages on biblical stories. Who's the good guys? Who's the bad guys? Who's the angels or demons? And after a lot of thought, I've decided what it all means. Stop. Just like the film isn't meant to be a linear narrative to be decoded, like a final answer on literal purgatory or dying fever dream doesn't matter. Like the government hallucinogen or metaphysical journey doesn't really matter. The idea of placing this into a neat biblical allegory doesn't matter. Decoding a binary role of good guy or bad guy doesn't matter. Just stop trying to decode a message from the director and writer and let it mean to you what it means to you. So when I stop trying to solve a puzzle of metaphor and imagery and allegory the filmmakers have created, and instead just bring myself and my experiences, what do I get from the film? Well, some Christian traditions have a perspective that only a very few select few will end up in heaven and it's already predetermined. Some treat it like a scale of good deeds versus bad deeds, and some have the accept Jesus into your heart and that's your way to heaven. I am an atheist, but I come from a Catholic background. And for those not familiar, a summarized gist of it is heaven comes when you've done the proper rituals of confession and penance to absolve yourself of your sins. So, what would that mean in the context of Jacob's ladder? The sin that Jacob carries is the guilt and shame over his failure to protect his son. We find out early in the film that his son Gabe had died, and through the film it is communicated that Jacob blames himself for the car accident that led to Gabe's death. So his acceptance of this and the relinquishing of guilt is the stand-in for the confession and repentance needed before moving on to heaven. And we see this self-forgiveness in the taking of Gabe's hand as he ascends the titular Jacob's ladder.
Titular, huh?
So while the movie doesn't explicitly show Jacob finding a specific version of faith, I still think that the film is a journey of faith shaped by what the viewer is bringing into the movie with them. So while the literal events of the two films are obviously similar enough to make one say, hey, I've seen this before, with their slipping into dark parallel worlds, encountering characters representing temptation, being stalked by demonic entities, and being revealed to be dead the entire time. Are there deeper messages that are similar? And I think there are. In both cases, we have a film about a character who experiences an imagined or perhaps literal world where they are given an opportunity to explore and find a sense of faith and peace. In Mary's case, she thrice rejects faith and fights against peace and acceptance of her death. And the film gives us a message that her fate is a horrific suffering. Jacob, though, his journey does accept that these devils are really angels freeing him, and in the finding of that faith obtains a sense of peace and a hopeful ending. So considering they are both coming from the same source material, it could be said that they are stories comparing the path of tranquility that comes from a sense of peace with your own death versus what happens to one that never arrives at that peace. Same story, just with a different final path chosen, and enough for one to say, hey, I've seen this before. So let's go over that again. Today I'm going to talk about a film that's a horror classic, but not one that kicked off a franchise or became a Halloween staple. It's a bit more of a cerebral film than a fun film. It became well known enough that there was a remake years later, but the remake is largely forgotten and failed to have the same impact as the original. I was surprised to find out in my research that despite making this film, the director hadn't done any other horror movies, despite this one being so impactful on the genre. For those who have played Silent Hill, some of this description may sound familiar. A main character that navigates a world where reality seems to be in flux. They'll slip in and out of a mirror world where time distorts and everything gets dark and surreal, and will encounter dark, twisted, almost demonic versions of humans who watch them or follow them with hostile intent. Some of these monstrous characters are shown to the audience with a sped-up frame rate to make their movements seem bizarre and otherworldly, and we as the audience are never sure what scenes are real or imagined, as they use that trope of the main character suddenly waking up from sleep, and neither we nor the characters are sure if that means the prior scene was just a dream, or if it really happened. The big reveal at the end of the film is that the totality of the film was imagined. While rather common to encounter these types of films in the post-Sixth Sense world, this is an early example of a main character was dead the whole time movie. And the whole film was a surreal imagined possible future, or perhaps a literal purgatory lived out in the dreams of the protagonist in the moments between their awareness of their impending death and their eventual acceptance of their death. In that imagined world, our protagonist encounters a variety of characters, some seeming to encourage a moving on, while others act to tempt the character to remain in this liminal space. The world seems to be collapsing around the protagonist, as a doctor they've been seeing for their deteriorating mental health seems to disappear.
Doctor, you've got to tell me what to do.
I need to see Dr. Carlson, please.
Carlson? Is he new here?
New? No, he's been here for years.
Not according to my charts.
The film ends with the reveal of the character being dead the entire time, and we linger over their body and the credits roll. So there we have it. An old black and white film directed by a guy specializing in educational shorts about a blank slate damsel in distress being chased around town by ghouls, and a super cerebral, almost abstract horror film made by a drama director about PTSD, veterans facing his demons, and close enough to each other to make me say, hey, I've seen this before. And here we are at the end, where I like to shove in my thoughts that didn't make it into the main script. As I mentioned before, each of these films were remade, and I was going to get into each remake and what it meant, but the script had already hit a dozen pages, so I just super quick thoughts on each one. Carnival of Souls, surprisingly good. I was expecting not to like it, but it gave the main character some more agency, did a bit more with foreshadowing what she was really experiencing. It put in a trauma backstory that didn't feel salacious to me, and it was clearly affected by the fact that it came out after the 1990 Jacob's Ladder, as the ghouls in it look much more like the demonic entities of Jacob's Ladder than the original Carnival of Souls. The Jacob's Ladder 2019 remake, though, was not great. It did end up mirroring the biblical story closer, with the inclusion of a brother character, but it kind of lacked the soul of the original. It still included the point of the film monologue, but it was delivered poorly, and since the reveal at the end was so very different than the original, its inclusion just feels confusing.
Once you made your peace, devils, the angels freeing you from this earth.
So that's all I've got to say about the remakes. I also feel like I bit off more than I could chew with this one. My educational background is in history and political science, so my film analysis comes from a very layperson's perspective. After literally spending weeks trying to analyze the meaning of Jacob's Ladder, it feels a bit like a cop-out that my final answer was, the meaning is dependent on what the audience brings into the viewing. Trying to put together a linear narrative or decoding a secret message from the writer is the wrong approach. But unfortunately, that's where I arrived. I try to avoid watching other people's analyses while actively working on a script, so that way I don't end up regurgitating their takes. So if you know all the reasons my final take is wrong, well, I'm sure you're probably right. I did see in some brief research that the writer was actually Jewish and that he was more influenced by Buddhist theology than Abrahamic while he was writing the story. And I was like, nope, I'm halfway through the script. I'm not going to restart this through a new lens after I've already settled on the film taking an explicitly Christian influence. You had your characters repeatedly talk about hell, so we're stuck to what I already know. And ugh, everything is just so much easier when talking about queer movies. To wrap up, I like to end each episode with a thank you to the film review channels that have inspired me to make my own channel. Today, a thank you to Maggie Mae Fish. Unlike me, she did go to film school and has the knowledge and background to do deep dives into themes and meanings. I really like her channel. And despite doing those super deep dives, she explains in an extremely approachable manner and doesn't expect her audience to already know all the terms of cinematic language, but also doesn't feel like she's at all talking down when she explains the basics of how particular cinematic techniques add to the meaning of a piece. So thank you, Maggie Mae Fish, for your awesome channel. Thank you to all of y'all that made it this far into the video. And if you can, please provide me the YouTube Holy Trinity. Like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope you come and join for the next one. Bye! This is the Editing Doll with final thanks and message to self debriefing. Thanks to Violet Nightflower, who made the title card for this episode. I think it came out awesome, and the link to her Phosphorus Blue Sky contact will be in the description, in case anyone else is looking for a commission. I get a different artist for each video, and I've loved all the pieces so far. Thanks as always to the folk who have to listen to me babble about my projects while they're in production. My co-workers Kay and M, my housemate Elle, and also all the community folk I chat with that always give me such great encouragement. Notes to self. It's okay to abandon a project. Once I found out both films were inspired by the same source, I rewrote large sections of the script, so the whole thing felt like it lost focus. But I got trapped in that sunken cost fallacy, and I felt like I'd already put so much time into it that I just kind of had to drag the corpse of this video across the finish line. In the future, though, I need to know that it's okay to just walk away from a video when my heart's not in it. The production time on the last two videos was about a month and a half each. This one took significantly longer. Like I said before, if I get to a point where I'm averaging 250 upvotes per video, I'll work at a 6-week turnaround time. But if it doesn't reach that point, then, I'll just work on stuff when I feel like it. By the time I do the next one, I'll have a better microphone, and it should sound a lot better than the first few videos have. And I'll eventually start researching a real camera, too. So thanks for putting up with the mediocre equipment so far, and thanks for watching. Bye!